Okay, Rabbi Isai, welcome to this week's share on the halachas of Hespedim and when Avela starts and ends. Let's do it. So this is actually a topic which is Lamaisa, unfortunately, in this world. People should live to a very, very long, very old age, but it's something that's definitely Lamaisa across the board, and lots of people do not know these halachas well. I understand it's not the most exciting halachas to learn. It's not the most exciting halachas to get involved in. But l'maisa, there's often lots and lots of confusion. People seemingly don't know what to do. And now it's time to learn the halachas of Hespedim and when Avela starts and ends. So the Shulchan Aruch says there's a mitzvah gedoyla to give a hesped. Now, the Shulchan Aruch and Shin Dalad Mem, actually, not Mem Dalad, because that's not a nice siman. So, 344th siman of Shulchan Aruch says, one in Yardea, one should raise their voice when giving a hesped in order to break the hearts of those that are listening. And, we know nowadays some people have the minhag to give a hesped with in the tune. There's a whole tune, emotional tune used to give a hesped that some people do. Some people have that minhag to break the hearts of the listeners. L'maisa, if you know how to do the tune, Givaldic do the tune, and if you don't know how to do the tune, then don't do the tune. Now, what should one speak about in this hesped? So one should speak about the good qualities of the nifter. And one should, try to get people emotional, try to get people to cry about the loss in front of us. Now, during a hesped, it's fine to exaggerate during a hesped, but don't over-exaggerate during the hesped. Exaggeration, okay. Over-exaggeration, not okay. That's already being considered untruthful. And at the end of the day, if the people who are listening are like, come on, that's not Uncle Baruch that we know, then it's not so good. Okay. One, as we said, speak about the good qualities. Now, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Mem Zayin Mem Aleph, discusses what's the purpose of the hesped. Is the purpose of the hesped for the sake of the nifter, or is the purpose of the hesped for the sake of those around? And the Gemara seems to conclude the ikar purpose of the hesped is for the living. Now, the Poskim discuss multiple reasons for the hesped. One reason is that the listeners should learn from the positive traits, the midas tovos of the nifter. Number two is the listeners should cry when they think about the loss, the nebuch that we lost, which will bring up tshuva for the listeners. And number three is when we discuss the nifter's positive traits, it's going to cause rachamei shemayim, which will result in the nifter having a positive judgment. Now, we give hespedim for women in the same exact way that we give hespedim for men. One shouldn't come to think that it is not sneistic or something like that we're talking about all the milos of this woman. We know the poskim say, speak just the same way that you would speak about a man, about all his milos, speak about a woman and all her milos. What about nebuch when children are nifter? What about when we give a spade? Do we give a spadim to them? So Shulchan Aruch says we do not give a spadim for any child that's under 5 or 6. No spadim. Older than that, we give a spadim. Now, I know it was asked of Rav Yashiv about a 4-year-old that was nifter, whether a spadim could be given, and he was matter a spadim to be given. And he said the reason, which is a svara, which is we can understand. Nowadays, it's an uncommon reality for young children to die. It used to be once upon a time there was sickness, there was poverty, there was starvation, and young children died. It wasn't so uncommon. So the degree of tragedy was considered relatively less. But now that it's, now, once again, back then, it was relatively less. But now that Baruch Hashem, it's less common for young children to be nifter, so then you could do Hespedim even for a 4-year-old. That's what Rav Elyashiv pasted. Once again, I don't know if he said you should, but I think it was more of a could than a should. Now, the Shulchan Aruch says, what if somebody said, I don't want Hespedim? Nah, just put me in the ground. I don't want Hespedim. So the Shulchan Aruch says you should listen to the person's request and you do not give Hespedim. But what if it was a gadol, somebody, a very, very great person, that says no Hespedim? So this is a big machlokes. It's not new, it's old, it's a big machlokes what to do. The Piskei Shivah brings the Beis Yaakov, who says that you give a hesped anyways. We don't listen. He has no right. It's the kavod HaTorah. It's the tzibur needs the hespedim, and therefore he has no right to say that he doesn't want them. We give the hespedim anyways. Ki Yadua, it's very known. The Noidim Yehuda, he gave a hesped to the Pnei Yeshua when the Pnei Yeshua was nifter in the mid-1800s, even though the Pnei Yeshua requested no hespedim. The Noidim Yehuda said, sorry, I'm giving a hesped anyways. Similarly, it's known that Rav Shlomo Eger, Rav Akiva Eger's son, gave a hesped for Rav Akiva Eger, even though Rav Akiva Eger said, no hespedim, I don't want any hespedim. The Meister of Shlomo Eger gave hespedim anyways. The Gesher Chaim, Rav Chukatinsky, brings down that when a gadol requests not to have hespedim, you should give short hespedim. However, there are other opinions like the Ber Yosef and the Shut Chaim Shol that say you do not give a hesped. I think the general minhag is we do give some sort of a hesped. The most what the Gesher Chaim brings down, I think, is the minhag for whenever a gadol has requested not to. Now, generally, I don't know if we ever actually gave so much thought to that, ever think about it. You know, in Klal Yisrael we have many big shuls. Big shuls are usually a great location to gather in people. And we know that levayas are generally done not in shuls. They're generally done in the Beis Levayas. Whether it's what is it called? What is it called in Bar Park? I forgot what it's called. The famous one that I've been to many times. I can't remember. No, it's what is it called? Something Chapels. It's on 14th Avenue, 13th or 14th Avenue or 12th Avenue. I'm losing. I can't remember anymore. Okay, whatever it's called. It's just on the tip of my tongue. Or everybody knows it in Eretz Yisrael. Shamgar, for example, the Beis Levayas. So that's where Levayas usually happen, in the Beis Levayas. Why don't we just do it in the shul? Well, the Shulchan Aruch brings down, we do not have a Levaya, we do not bring a mace into a shul. However, if we are dealing with a Rosh Shiva or a Gadol, a big person, then we could have the Levaya. We bring the minhag then is to bring the nifter into the shul and do the Levaya in the Beis Medrash. And most hold that the minhag is, most hold that we should do it as well for the wife of the Gadol or the wife of the Rosh Shiva. Now, we do not give Hespedim on Shabbos or Yontif. What other days do we not give Hespedim? So the Shulchan Aruch says we don't give Hespedim on Rosh Chodesh, we don't give Hespedim on Chanukah, we don't give Hespedim on Purim or Shushan Purim. And if it's an Uber year, a leap year, which has the extra Adar, we don't give on Yud, Dalet, and Tesvav of the first Adar, even though it's not Purim and Shushan Purim, simply speaking. We don't give Hespedim on either Yud, Dalet, or Tesvav, either the first or the second. We also don't give Hespedim during the month of Nisan. And the Shulchan Aruch Rav also brings down, in addition, we don't give Hespedim on Erev Yom Kippur. And, I would think it would end there. But we see there's poskim that bring down all sorts of other days. Lamaisa, the Gesher Chaim brings down, he says any day in which Tachnan is not said, there's going to be no Hespedim. No Tachnan, no Hespedim. Now we're not talking about the people that don't say Tachnan with a calendar, with every Rebbe's yard site and everybody. I'm not talking about that calendar. I'm talking about the real days of no Tachnun, like whatever it is, Lag Ba'omer, Tu B'Av, whatever it is. So that the Gesher Chaim brings that down, and he brings down that some places have this minhag and some places don't have this minhag. I think if you have the minhag, you keep it, and if you don't have the minhag, you don't. And what if you don't know? I don't know. I don't know. Ask. Okay. Now, even when a hesped is not said, most permit what's called divrei shvach. Now, this is a very controversial topic. Some people scream against this by saying, come on, give me a break. You say no hesped, but divrei shvach, that's okay. And they go give a whole hesped, and they call it divrei shvach. And how can you tell me that the Igros Moshe just walked in? I've been waiting for Igros Moshe. All right. So they call it divrei shvach, but they really just give a hesped. And some people lament this and say that's wrong, that's not right. Whereas I've heard others claim, no, our Hespedim nowadays, they're not really a Hespedim. They're not a Hespedim like they used to have. They used to hire miskoinim. They used to hire professional hesped givers that would make everybody burst into tears. It's not like that nowadays. The whole din doesn't really apply. You could just give a regular hesped. I do not have a strong opinion on this. It's very hard to really understand what was. It seems to be you should give a toned down something for sure. And you definitely shouldn't use that hesped tune that some people like to give a hesped and a hesped tune that try to get the momentum and the feeling and the argosh in the air. That you definitely shouldn't give on one of these days. But if you want to go and say that this person was such a great person, he did such and such great deeds, I'll give you a story about some of the good deeds that he did, l'chayra, that should be okay. But I agree, this is a little bit of a unclear, controversial topic. Okay. Now, fine. So that is about Hespedim. And what if, by the way, one more thing actually about Hespedim that I forgot to mention. What if the guy's a Russia? What if the guy, not so much to say about him, So it's definitely a challenge. There's certainly Rabbanim in certain areas that get this challenge. Usually you should be able to look at somebody and find some good deed, some good thing about them. What if you mamush can't? It's a little bit of a problem. At least if he has good kids, you could say, look, this guy, look what came out of him. He has such great kids. If you don't have that, listen, you can't make stuff up. So you have to try to work with whatever you could, and you can't just make stuff up because that's not going to be a schus for the nifter. Okay, now done with Hespedim. Now let's discuss what about Avelis. When does Avelis start? When does Avelis end? This is a little complex, so bear with me, everybody. The beginning is easy, the end gets a little tricky, but I'll make it as clear as possible. When does Avelis start? So, the Avelis starts when, for those that attend the burial, attend the kfura, it starts after the burial. What does the burial mean? So some poskim, some of the machlokes achronim, whether it is once the body is covered with a layer of dirt, that's one possibility, or the other possibility is when the grave is completely filled up. And even if they have the minhag of making a little mound on top of the grave, if that's what the Chaver Kadisha does, when that mound is finished. Or if they have the minhag of putting the rocks around the plot, around the place of the Kvura, when they finish putting the rocks around, when they finish the process. How do we paskin? So, and by the way, you might think there's not a big nafkamina. There definitely is a nafkamina. Now, did you finish it before Shkia or after Shkia? We have to know what's the first day of Avelis. What's the yahrzeit? What's the first day of Avelis? Well, the yahrzeit is a little bit tricky. I'm going to put actually the yahrzeit question on the side. But when did Avelis start? Did Avelis start? We have to only after Kfura. So was the Kfura before Shkia or after Shkia? It could really be a nafkamina, even though we're talking about usually around 5 to 10 minutes, usually around 5 minutes or so, but that 5 minutes could make the difference from before Shkia or after Shkia. Now, how do we paskin? We paskin when the kfura is complete. So we judge the day based off when the kfura is complete. So when the kfura is complete, what time is it? So actually, I said Shkia, but I was actually misquoting a little bit, because even if it finishes during Ben Hashmashas, we'll consider it like the earlier days. Because we have a klal by Avelis that you're going to see we're going to be using a lot. Safek Avelis lahakal. By Avelis, we're always makel. And having Avelis end the day earlier is considered a kula, that this person has to sit Avelis for less amount of time. So sit Shiva for a shorter amount of time. So therefore, if it happened during Ben Hashmashas, we're going to assume it's the day earlier. But once again, those 5 minutes could be the difference between during Ben Hashmashas to after Ben Hashmashas. Okay. What if the relatives don't attend the kfura, but they are close by? And for those in Yerushalayim, they know this very well. Because the minig in Yerushalayim, I'm not getting involved at this point whether somebody who lives in Yerushalayim needs to keep this minig Yerushalayim or doesn't. That could be a different discussion. But certainly most of the locals keep this minig Yerushalayim of the children of the nifter not attending the kfura. So if the children of the nifter do not attend the kfura, when do they start their avails? So if they're close by and they're in Yerushalayim and the kfura is in Yerushalayim, or I would say even if it's in Beit Shemesh, which is relatively close by. So once the kfura is finished, they get that phone call that the kfura, or WhatsApp, or whatever it is, that the kfura is finished. Then at that point, that's when they start their avelis. So, and I've done this before, is something that somebody there should be mindful to do, is when you have kfura, which is very close to Shkia, which by the way happens all the time, because in Yerushalayim at least, in America I feel like most levayas are in the morning, but in Eretz Yisrael levayas are, it depends when the person was nifter, and often, it's very often that it's going to be close to Shkia. Because if it was like where they have to rush to do the kfur before Shkia, they rush to do the kfur before Shkia. And if they don't have to rush, so they'll do it without rushing and schedule to have the kfur before Shkia. So it's very common that the kfur is before Shkia. So I always will try to call or send a WhatsApp to the family who's going to be sitting Shiva when it's right around Shkia time that the kfur finishes, in order to tell them that the kfur is finished, so that first day they could start sitting Shiva before Ben Hashmashas is out. Because if nobody tells them, if they never get that phone call, therefore until 40 minutes later, a half an hour later, somebody shows up at the door, I just came back from the kfur, because nobody called them, and it's already after, then they have to sit Shiva for another day. Now, somebody might view it as a positive, but we generally in halacha view it as we'll try to shorten people's avelis. Okay, good to know. Now, if the burial will be in a different city, right? So, the person is, let's say the levaya was in Yerushalayim, but this person's going to be buried in Tzfas, somewhat of a distance away. So when do the Avelim start the Avel? So once again, if the Avelim are going to go with the Nifter to Tzfas to be buried there, then that's Pashid that the Avelis is going to start after Kfura, just like we said earlier. But what if the Avelim are not going to the burial? Then the Avelis will start when the Nifter departs from the Levaya, or from the Avelim. So therefore, let's say, in this example, they had the Hespedim by Shamgar, and it finished at 6 p.m. And then the Nifter was brought to Tzfas, and it took, 2.5 hours to get up there, and then to do the Kfura. And by the time that was done, it was way after Ben Hashmashas. The Maisa, the earlier day, is when the Avelis starts. Now there's an exception to the above rule. If the, what I would call the undisputed Gadol Habayis went with the Avelim to the Kfura, meaning most of the Avelim stay in Yerushalayim, but the Gadol Habayis went with the Avelim to Tzfas, in this example, to do the burial, the subordinate, the minor, the less important, so to speak, Avelim, they don't get to decide to start the Shiva. It's only based on what the Gadol Habayis starts. So let's give you an example. If the mother of the family is Niftaris, and the children didn't go to the Kfura because they were children and keeping this minig Yerushalayim, so they went back to the house in Yerushalayim, but the father, who's the spouse of the Niftaris, goes to the Kfura in Yerushalayim, then if he is the undisputed Gadol Habayis, we'll discuss what that means in a second, then the Kfura, then the Avelis will not start until the Kfura, because it goes but to the father. They all follow the father when there's a Gadol Habayis. But if there is no Gadol Habayis, then they will start when the Nifter departs from them. Now, who is considered a Gadol Habayis? This is where it gets a little tricky, because there's different shitas. There's 3 shitas, primarily. There might be 4, but I'm going to combine it to 3. As to who is the Gadol Habayis. The shita of the Shulchan Aruch is the Gadol Habayis is the decision maker. He's the one who gets to decide. He gets to decide what? I'll give you an example. If there was a debate in the family, is the Niftaris going to get buried in this cemetery or that cemetery? Who makes the decisions? Who's the one who calls the shots? Who's the one who has the main push to what the family is doing for Pesach? I'm not saying that everybody needs to be together, but who's the one who's going to, their opinion is the superior opinion in the family. So that person, Zak the Shulchan Aruch, that's the Gadol Habayis. Zak the Shach, he says, who's the Gadol Habayis? The one who has the Chiyuv Kfura of the Nifter. So if the Nifter has a spouse, so the spouse is generally the one who has the main Chiyuv of the Kfura. Now it might be the son is the one who's taking care of it because, let's say, the spouse is old and the son's taking care of it because it's easier for the son than the old spouse. It's still the old spouse's Chiyuv, it's just the son's helping out. So it would still be considered the spouse. If there is no spouse, so it might be, the oldest son's chiyuv to take care of it. That would be the Shach's definition of who's the Gadol Habayis. Then there's a group of other poskim who say, and Moshe Feinstein happens to go this way, the financer of the house, the one who supports the house. Now, this is something that you won't necessarily have when each has their own family. You generally won't. This is more common when there's somebody younger who's nifter or nifteris. So this is the one who pays the bills. Now this could be, by the way, if there's like 3 of them are learning in kollel and is being supported by the one father, he's still the one who pays the bills, so to speak. But usually this is only going to be when people are living in the house and living at home. So if the Avelim are living at home, living in the house, he's going to be the Gadol Habayis. Now you're generally only going to have a undisputed Gadol Habayis when somebody young passes away. Because once again, when the old 98-year-old lady passes away, and even if 99-year-old husband's around, each of their kids, he's not the 99-year-old, is usually not supporting these kids. Usually each kid supports their own house, and they're not all reliant on each other. And usually there's not one decision maker for all of them. They usually make their own decisions, etc. And therefore, there's usually not going to be an undisputed Gadol Habayis when it's an older family. But when the 40-year-old lady never passes away, then there's usually, and that husband is usually going to be the Gadol Habayis who's going to take care of everything. Okay. Now, if you don't have all these 3 requirements, then the non-traveling Avelim will start their Avelis right when the Nifter departs from the Avelim. And fine. one who is in a different city entirely, right? He wasn't there either. So it's a machlokes when the shiva starts for him. Does the shiva start at the time when he hears the news that the person was nifter, or is the kfura what decides it? So is it when he hears the news or the kfura? So the lemaisa, it's a machlokes, and lemaisa we say the aval gets to decide. On one hand, he could decide from when he hears, and therefore he'll be able to often end shiva a day earlier, because nowadays it usually doesn't take so long to hear, right? So nowadays the person was nifter, he'll usually get a phone call within 15 minutes that his, let's say, brother was nifter, and actually had somebody that I know well, one of my rabbanim. So his brother was nifter in America, and he didn't go, he didn't go to the levaya, and he couldn't make it to the levaya, correct? And he wasn't going for the shiva, etc. He couldn't make it, and he stayed here, and he actually started. I didn't chazim in this. I didn't think about it at this time, so he started the avelis when he heard the news, and then I went to Menachem him on what I thought was the last day that he was sitting shiva. And it turns out he had already gotten up from Shiva, because he started this day earlier. I didn't take that into account. I didn't really think about it. It's not that I thought about it in detail and assumed he was going like the other shitas. I just didn't really think about it. Now, or he could choose to go for the day of Kfur. So let's say he needs a day to close down his business, give over the rights to his business partner or his key employee, figure out something that they're going to run the business because he can't work during Avelis. Sometimes there are things that need to be figured. Make those final big business moves that he needs to do so he doesn't have to work for a week, and base it off the Levaya, he could decide to do that as well. Now the Maisa, if he is being active in arranging the Kfura, for example, meaning even if he's overseas, he's in a different, but he's the one, he's the Rav of the family. So he might be in Eretz Yisrael. But he's the one that is asking all the questions. Yeah, bury him over there. Yeah, this spot's better. Yeah, work with this Chevra Kadisha. Yeah, let me... Then he still has a din of onin, because he's being oisik in the Kfura. And if he has the din onin, because he's being oisik in the Kfura, then his Avelis can't start. But once he's done doing that, then he can have the choice to start then or wait until the Kfura. But once the Kfura happens, he certainly has to start. Fine. Now, if this is a very common case where what happens? The traveling with the Niftar Avelim return and join the non-traveling Avelim. So let's get this straight. The person was Niftar on Sunday, right? Actually, the person was nifter on Matzah Shabbos. Let's do it this way. They had a big levaya Sunday morning in New York. The nifter took a Sunday night flight to Eretz Yisrael, and then had a Monday afternoon levaya. They got it in before Shkia, right? So when did those avelim? Who went with the nifter? Half the avelim went with the nifter, half stayed in New York. So the ones in New York, they started on Sunday, as we discussed. The traveling avelim, when did they start? They started on Monday. Now, after the Kfur, they take the Monday night flight back to New York. Or maybe they sit for a day in Eretz Yisrael and take the Tuesday night flight back to New York. Either way, they get back to New York. When are the Avelim getting up? So obviously the Avelim never went. They would be getting up on Sunday. Unless, as we said, the Gadol HaBayis was traveling. If the Gadol HaBayis traveled, then they didn't really start their Avelis on Sunday. But let's say the Gadol HaBayis didn't travel. There was no Gadol HaBayis. Let's say there was no Gadol HaBayis. So the ones who didn't travel, Sunday is going to be day one. And those that those that traveled, when are they going to choose when is there going to be? So Zakter Moshe, they're going to end day 2. Monday's going to be their day 1, and they're going to end at different times. This half of the family gets up from Shivah, Shabbos, which is really Friday, whatever, and the other half of the family gets up from the Shivah Sunday morning. Whereas some poskim go based on, I would say, the pashtus, the simple reading of the Shach, and they say that the whole family gets up together and they all get up on Friday, because you don't get up on Shabbos morning in the example that I gave. Okay, there is a special scenario where a shiva can be shortened. This is a something that's usually only done for somebody who's sick or old or whatever, and they know this person physically can't go and sit shiva for a week. So there's a way, as long as you meet these criteria, this person who hears about who could join the shiva, middle of the shiva, and end together with the other relatives. So sometimes they'll tell an old person, they will get these criteria on the last day of shiva, he'll join the relatives that have been sitting for 5 days, and then they'll all get up together. That way, this sick or elderly person only has to sit shiva for 1 day. So how do they do that? What criteria do you need? So we need that this one who hears about the shiva after 5 days after this person was nifter, after, very often it's like the old brother that they would do this to. So he cannot start sitting shiva where he is. He has to only start sitting shiva with the relatives that are sitting shiva. If he starts sitting shiva in his own house, then he has a full week. He was mechayiv himself for a full week because it's his own personal shiva. But he needs to start sitting shiva with those relatives.
Can you do such a thing?
Yes, you could. Now there are poskim that say that he needs to have heard about it once he was already in their area. Now that's debatable. The Maisa, lichatchila, that should be done. The best thing is, you bring him over to their house and you say, "Oh, your brother Moshe, Aaron, your brother Moshe was nifter." But once again, if that's going to give him a heart attack, it's better not to give him a heart attack. But Lemaisa, if it could be done, that's what's best to be done, because there are persons that say it only works if you do it like that. But Lemaisa, if what you need to do, you have to tell him, "Listen, your brother Moshe was nifter. It's very sad, and it's very, very sad. And do you want to come? I'll drive you over to the shiva." That's the best way of doing it. Now, the number 2 criteria is that the oval needs to be within a 24 hours of travel. At the time of the person died, he had to be within a 24 hours of travel to the place where the person was nifter, or the place where the person was buried, or the place of the main shiva. Meaning it had to be at one of the main spots. The main spot is where the person was nifter, or then the main spot became the place where the person was buried, or the main spot became the main shiva. Nowadays, this is much easier to fulfill than once upon a time, because now that we have air travel, and the Aruch HaShulchan already says nowadays that we have trains, we can extend much further. Well, Aruch HaShulchan, we've advanced much further than that. Nowadays that we have planes, most of the world you could get to within 24 hours. Now, just to be clear, it doesn't mean that just flight time. We're talking about how long it would take to book a flight, throw some stuff in a bag, drive to the airport. And once again, if you're from New York, you're from Yerushalayim, you think you're driving to the airport just a half an hour, whatever. There are some places where you have to drive 3 hours to the airport, to the closest airport, especially international airport. So you have to be able to get to the airport. You have to be able to get onto a real flight that exists. And you can't make up. It has to be a real flight. So you have to have been able. That person has to have been able to get to the airport, book the flight, get onto the airport, get onto that flight, and get to New York, LA, Eretz Yisrael, wherever it was that they needed to get to. And it has to work. And you can't make a cheshbon if it's the type of person that would never fly a private plane. You can't say, oh, well, they could have hired a private plane. Now, if it's the type of person that has a couple times in their life taken a private plane, even if they don't usually do this, but it's like, it's within their hasagas of taking a private plane, then you could make a cheshbon. Yeah, they could have gotten there within 24 hours by taking a private plane. Now, that's not most people's reality. But it has to be something that was shaykh for them to get there within 24 hours. Now, that's requirement number 2. Requirement number 3 is that the main shiva needs to be in the city of either the kfura or the death. If the person was, if the person was nifter in some hospital in Pennsylvania, because that's where they told, he was told to be for the best care, and then he was buried in somewhere deep in Long Island, but the mice of the family is sitting Shiva in Lakewood, then you don't have this requirement. But, if he was nifter in New York, I don't think it has to be like mamish the same, couple blocks. It doesn't have to have been that he was nifter in Maimonides and you're in Borough Park. If he was nifter in New York, he was nifter in the Manhattan Hospital and one of the various ones, and the mice you're somewhere, it doesn't make a difference whether you're in the 5 towns of Brooklyn or whatever, that counts as the same city. I believe in this. So it has to be that, once again, the main shiva is in this place of either where the kfura was or where the person was nifter. If you don't have this requirement, b'shas hatchak and a major need, one could be mekel. The 4th requirement is that the shiva, it has to be a shiva. I've been using this term main shiva. What do I mean by main shiva? It has to be the shiva that the gadol habayis is there. Now over here we're going to be much more mekel. It has to be the gadol habayis of any of the 3 possibilities of gadol habayis. So he's either the decision maker of the family, or he's the one with the chiyuv, or he's the financer of the family. This is much more common that you're going to have somebody that gets one of those 3 requirements. And once again, even this gadol habayis, he doesn't have to be there the entire time. If the gadol habayis is there, even part of the time, or most of the time I should say, that would count to make this to be considered a main shiva. Now, if this gadol habayis, and it's true even if the gadol habayis wasn't there at this time, but he was there for most of the time, in this last day, let's say he went to sit in his own house, it's still considered the main shiva. And if this, let's say, older relative comes to join the shiva on that last day, then that is okay. I'm just going to throw in another halacha, which is interesting, people don't know. You do not need to tell somebody that their relative has passed away. I mean, what? You're not going to tell somebody? Once again, all normal circumstances, you tell somebody. There's no question about it. But I'll give you 2 examples of times when they don't tell people that somebody was nifter. One example is that the person is very old and weak. So they don't want to disturb their health by distressing them, telling them that their relative was nifter. So you don't need to tell them if that's the decision that the family makes. For Kiyadua, everybody knew. When Rebbetzin Kanievsky was nifter, Reb Chaim's Rebbetzin, and Rav Elyashiv was still alive, everybody knew it was like the secret thing. Before anybody would go into Rav Elyashiv, there's the thing, don't mention Rebbetzin Kanievsky was nifteris. And they never told Rav Elyashiv that Rebbetzin Kanievsky was nifteris. Now, most people say Rav Elyashiv knew because, Rebbetzin Kanievsky would go visit him once a month and she stopped coming. So the Chayyim Rav Elyashiv figured it out. But still, for Rav Elyashiv's health, they didn't want to tell. During COVID, this was a very common thing. when somebody was nifter, they didn't tell their old relatives that that person was nifter, because once again, you do not need to tell the person to disturb their health. It's okay if the person doesn't know. And another example is, which is a common example, somebody that had nothing to do with their father. You have all these cases where, for whatever reason, without getting involved, this person hasn't spoken to their father for the last 40 years. The father ran away. The father became not from and flew the coop. It was one of those aguna situations. Or they just didn't get along, or who knows what. Certainly with siblings, unfortunate case, it definitely happens. So in that case, if let's say somebody knows that this person's relative was nifter, and this person has no emotional connection to the one that was nifter, you don't need to tell them. You don't need to. Is it better to? I mean, I guess each individual, it's very hard to give klolim on this. Each individual case is its own case. But once again, obviously in any normal situation with normal people and normal relationships, people want to know and they want to set shiva for their loss, and that should definitely be done. But once again, in these abnormal situations, it is not absolutely necessary. Thank you for listening, and we should always have B'seres Tevis.